You and I had a conversation before, which I'd love for you to share a little bit about. You are not from the beauty industry. So actually, when I was trying to craft your background, I was like, I don't even know these things that he does. I was like, these words are very foreign to me. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Cosmetics. Launching a new cosmetic ingredient sounds like cutting-edge scientific pursuit, but what happens after the breakthrough? In this episode of Demystifying Cosmetics, I'm joined by James Dillard, a product and innovation leader with a rare blend of technical depth, entrepreneurial grit, and market-savvy execution. James has led product strategy at companies like YouTube and Stripe and co-founded Macro Oceans, where he helps scale seaweed-based ingredients for beauty and personal care. Together, we unpack the often overlooked realities of ingredient innovation, from regulatory and IP hurdles to storytelling for investors and earning trust with formulators. James shares practical insights on avoiding the tech-first trap, building alignment across teams, and the nuanced path from molecule to market. Whether you're a founder, formulator, or just an ingredient curious, this episode offers an unfiltered look at what it really takes to launch something new in beauty. Welcome, James.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. You and I had a conversation before, which I'd love for you to share a little bit about. You are not from the beauty industry. And so actually, when I was trying to craft your background, I was like, I don't even know these things that he does. I was like, these words are very foreign to me. So, yeah. But your name is, you now are familiar in the cosmetic and beauty industry. So tell us a little bit about how you kind of found yourself in there. And I guess this does, go in part into, what inspired you to launch a new cosmetic ingredient.
Yeah, so my way into beauty is probably not the way that most people get into it. I got into it by way of kelp, which is seaweed.
I can guarantee that, well, I can't guarantee. I'm pretty sure that's like a very singular story of how you get into cosmetics.
Yeah, so we got excited about kelp and seaweed and its potential as a zero input crop. So no fertilizers, no pesticides, it grows really fast. And started looking at, all of the different things you could make kelp into. And really started from first principles around like, okay, well, if we're going to manufacture it and we've got a novel manufacturing process, it's got to start in small scales and it's got to be relatively high value in order to justify being made at those small scales. It's also got to play to the strengths of the kelp. And when you kind of look at what comes out, like matches all those criteria, you end up with like pharmaceuticals, beauty and cosmetics, and nutraceuticals. And we started going to some of the shows where, Expo West and Supply Side West and then ultimately at some point, Suppliers Day, and really felt like we understood why someone within the beauty industry would want to buy this better than we did in nutraceuticals. And we could meet more of them. When we were sitting across them, we felt like we understood their motivations. And then I really say, like, I found it to be a really warm community too, particularly on the like the industry side. I haven't done as much on the like kind of the consumer facing side, but what I always tell people is that it's a community that takes care of its own. And you kind of have to work to earn people's trust. But once you're trusted, it's people look out for you. And then because of that, you have to be really careful about how you treat people. I just because it's so small. So anyway.
I used to have a coworker who always said, small town, long life. And that always stuck with me despite, the billion-dollar market that the cosmetic industry is. It does feel very community-driven and relatively small. So, you're not new to, that 0 to 1 of saying like, I have an idea, let's, build it into a product or a service. And so, before you started, what did you imagine success would look like for you?
Yeah. Well, so I think what motivates me oftentimes is bringing something into the world that either couldn't have existed before or didn't exist before. And so I saw in Macro Oceans and in Kelp an opportunity to look from I fundamentally believe that seaweed should be used in more things. It's chemically very complex. It's easy to grow. We can grow it in the US at competitive prices. And really what is missing is the infrastructure to turn that into things that people need. And so then, while there were a lot of things that were totally new to me, the chemistry of seaweed processing, the chemistry of beauty, the science that goes behind how something works in a formula or on somebody's skin. From a product development perspective, there was a lot that's the same, because my last job before this was making Stripe apps, and Stripe apps is what's called a developer tool, and it's a way that a software developer can make a product offering for a consumer. And there are a lot of parallels in there between how a software developer is thinking about building their app and how a cosmetic chemist is thinking about building their product. And at the end of the day, you have to make it easier for them to deliver an experience for a consumer. And so I was always able to fall back on that. So while there were many, many, many times, I am so lost right now. I think if you're genuine about that, people, I really tried not to overstate, what I knew and what I didn't know. And I had a lot of people really help me and be kind and be like, let me teach you about what this is. And then I like learning too, right? So I like, now I know a lot about hyaluronic acid and how it works and why, and different, guar gum and xanthan gum and carbomer. Like, you learn about those things, and, it's really cool.
And now your medicine cabinet has 4 different overnight serums that you used for anti-aging,
definitely,
right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, they're my wife absolutely loved being like, oh, cool, I get to try this out. Anyway, lots of cool product trying on.
And so when you started and we've talked about this from, just kind of entering into the ingredient space and really not feeling like there was a lot of conversation being had in the community because either it's proprietary or, just that not the willingness to kind of share what we each are doing. But what surprised you most between the gap from like, hey, I've got this idea and now like R&D, we've proven things out, to then commercialization? What was the most surprising gap between R&D and commercialization?
Yeah, well, so I think a couple of things come to mind. I think one is there is less innovation in the industry than I personally would like to see around ingredients. I have some ideas about why that might be. But one of the things actually that really scared me as I was getting into this is like, wow, I see like a couple of companies that are putting out new ingredients, and I see some large companies that are continuing to evolve their product portfolio, but I just don't see that many startups here. And the reason that's a little bit scary is because that then makes you wonder if there's a reason for that, right? Is it a blue ocean or is it a dead ocean? And that I think it's tough to know the difference. I do think that there is, in a way that I don't totally understand, there is a little bit of a sense in which the industry wants to keep relationships closed. I don't feel like I totally understand that. On some level, I understand that a brand owner may not necessarily want people to know who their contract manufacturer is, or they want to present ingredients as like totally theirs rather than as like something that anybody can buy. At the same time, when I was always kind of comparing back to software, not because one's better than the other, but just to kind of say, what's the same, what's different, what's the same, what's different. And in the software world, people are quite willing to talk about the tools that they're using to build a product experience. I also think some of this is like, if you're a software developer, you end up with a bunch of time while you're waiting on your app to compile, and they sit there and they write. They really do. They write while they're like.
I was like, I've been at parties where like my boyfriend and his friends get together, and I'm just like, okay, isn't there like a Reddit thread that you guys should be like doing this on?
Right. But if you're a cosmetic chemist, your work time is in the lab. And so you're probably like thinking about these things, but there's no good way to like bring them out. But yeah, look, I think in general, there should be, and this is one of the reasons I was so excited. I've been a fan of your show like long before since I've been on it. Cause I'm like, okay, someone's talking about this, right? Like we do need more places for people to talk about these materials and why and what goes into them. Because I think the more that we give chances for new companies to get in there and experiment safely, of course. I don't want to skip any like regulatory steps, but I think many of the hurdles that I saw or that I had to work to get through were not regulatory. Those were actually fairly straightforward. You could find the rules, you could do the test. It was more figuring out how to get in front of the right people, figuring out who in the industry is open to experimenting versus who doesn't want to. And every industry has those dynamics.
Yeah. And, I guess you had posted, and that I came across it on LinkedIn, an article about what I wish I knew before launching an ingredient. And you talked about being, scientifically elegant and how that wasn't enough. And, I feel like I've encountered this too, that fallacy that, your belief in that, like, well, this is unique from a scientific perspective translates into, a uniqueness in the industry. But, how did you see that being scientifically elegant wasn't enough, and what ingredient developers, kind of miss when they focus solely on efficacy or solely on the, what is unique, maybe from the lens of a scientist or a chemist?
When you sit down across from somebody who buys ingredients, they will tell you that they care a lot about performance and efficacy and uniqueness, right? That those are kind of the main things. And when they're saying that, what they mean is they would like to be able to put in a bottle something that a consumer cannot get somewhere else, because if they can do that, they can create a deeper relationship with that customer or consumer and keep them for a long time, right? Like that's what's hard. If you're a brand, is there are all of these other brands, they all have stories. How do you stand out? How do you create a long-term relationship? But I think as an ingredient developer, sometimes you hear that and you say, oh, I just need to be special, right? Or all that matters is performance. Sure. And you're not translating that into for who, in what circumstance. Like, you're not putting yourselves in the mind of the person that's going to buy this in the store. And I think that translation layer is really, really challenging for people to get their heads around. I know for me, there were times where I was like, okay, well, like, do I just need to be unique? That doesn't feel, I had to get to the point where I could actually parse that and be like, no. Like, what uniqueness means is that it can be an entirely plant-based pump spray mineral sunscreen with no synthetics. That's unique because the people that are buying mineral sunscreens don't want it to be an aerosol. They want it to be a pump because they feel like that is more environmentally conscious, right? Okay, that's what makes it unique, not, any of the things that I care about. It's what they care about, right? And that filters through the different people in the industry in different ways. And you have to be able to demonstrate to them, and this is where the developer tool stuff really came in. Like, how do I show you that you can actually make something with this, right? Because it's not just like, you can fall into just being like, this is why this is better than that. But unless you show somebody how to build something with it, they don't care. And people are busy, right? They have tools that already work for them today, right? And the cognitive load, it's not about, honestly, it's about cognitive load. It's not about time. It's like they have however many projects that they have to complete, and they know how to do it with xanthan gum, and they're starting from scratch with yours. They know how to do it with hyaluronic acid, but, big kelp hydration, they've never done it before. They don't know if it'll work, right?
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucapse line by going to tagra.com/Cellucapse. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
I think what's interesting is when you talk about that, the different layers and how that information may be filtered. I also am curious to get your thoughts on this idea of uniqueness, right? When I am working on an ingredient, obviously, uniqueness is key, where, how is it differentiated? Even, okay, is the inky different? Is it a new inky? But then from, formulator perspective, I'm like, well, if this business goes under and I have to reformulate a product, right? Who the hell am I going to get it from? And so there's a different level of risk. So how do you kind of marry that? Like, yes, it is unique, and you won't have to reformulate, right? Like where is the redundancy, and also that, because they're very conflicting narratives.
Totally. I guess the first thing that I always reminded myself is that there is no rule that says this has to be easy. Like, on some level, if you're going to take on doing something new, you're just going to have different challenges than other people have. So I took that as a background. But I will say, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, fundamentally, you're in the hits business, or even like a product developer, you're in the hits business. I don't know if you know the restaurateur David Chang, but I just read this article where he talked about his process. And the first time he made one of his like really amazing dishes, he had people lining up outside of his restaurant to buy it. And he's like, this is what I need to be aiming for. Any dish that I want to put onto the menu should have people lining up around the block. And if it's not that good, it's not ready to go out. And I think that's the sort of mentality that we had to adopt. And I think if you do that, then what you're doing is you're looking for people within the industry that are willing to write you a contract because of the performance of your ingredient from the beginning, understanding that you don't have all of the supply, understanding where you actually are as a business, and you have to sell them on that. Yeah. And the performance, and I mean performance in the broad sense, like the package that you're providing to them has to be enough that they're going to take that risk. And so what that means is it either has to like massively drop their costs, right? So that they have more margin to work with, or it has to do something for consumers that their existing options don't do. And if it does, then you have an opportunity to kind of like put the pieces together. And that's really where you need to be. And if you're not there, that's a high bar, but if you're not there, you're probably better off saying, we're not ready yet, than you are trying to go and pull your way up that hill. It can be done, but it's a long road. And so, that's I think the biggest thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. I guess, I find that interesting because it makes sense. But then, having been in it, we always used to talk about this like 80% is good enough kind of thing, right? Because you don't want perfection to get in the way of progress. And so, at any point, did you kind of have that approach where you're like, okay, well, let's just put it out there and see where we're lacking? Because, the feedback for us in the ingredient development that I was doing was really critical, because we couldn't, even, being in the industry for as long as I have been, there were like things that I didn't consider, or ways that people were using an ingredient that I was just like, I did not think of that we wouldn't have gained if we didn't have that, kind of that access in at some point versus the perfected version.
I think I may be in the minority here, watching how people do this, but I really strongly believe that you should have that you should develop a use case around your ingredient that you are trying to own. And that is not the only thing that your ingredient can do. So one of the products I worked on at Macro Oceans is called Big Kelp Flex. It's a suspension agent, rheology modifier, super flexible ingredient, has a ton of potential in a ton of different use cases. But I really pushed the team to think, we went through a filtering mechanism working with some cosmetic chemists. We showed it to them early. We got their feedback. But I really felt like we should build a story around mineral sunscreen, because the suspension performance was really strong. And when we were talking to friends within the industry, they were like, look, I just don't love the options that I have here. I have synthetics, and then I have the naturals that I have, like, really don't do the job. And that in my estimation, was going to give us an entry point into conversations where people would be like, oh, I need something new here, right? It kind of got you over that hurdle where they were like, well, we don't necessarily know. This is new, right? So it's risky. It got you over the risk hurdle, right? Sure. And then my theory of the case, and what I saw with Big Kelp Hydration, which was our bioactive, was that even though you come with one use case, over time, people experiment into others. So, one example of that was that we built a bioactive around hydration use cases. But we had a lot of people gravitate towards it in hair care. And they were seeing some things that then fed back into our innovation loop around, okay, how can we build more data around what people are seeing to try to make that story stronger? So you absolutely want to be doing both. But I think when I look at the industry, I think that ingredient makers tend to kind of say, we're good for everything, which I read as we're good for nothing. And one of the ways I tried to just differentiate us was by saying, okay, this is what this is for, and then allowing you to discover that actually it could be for other things as well. I don't know how much of that is a generational shift. I did find that people that had been in the industry longer tended to kind of be like, no, don't tell me how to use it. Like, I want to figure it out. Whereas people that were newer really appreciated the oh, cool, I can use this in this project that I have active right now,
Interesting. That's an interesting observation. I don't know which one I'm in, but I hope it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, okay. And this is actually, if I could wish one thing to change for the industry, and I don't know how to change it because everyone has their own incentives, but it's that the number one thing in my estimation that makes it tough to be a startup in this space is that people are extremely reticent to commit to purchases. And from a startup's perspective, the thing that you live and die on is your ability to communicate to investors that you are making progress and that people want to buy the thing that you're making. And so those things run into each other in the beauty industry in a way that is particularly unfavorable to innovation. And I definitely think companies, contract manufacturers, I think are ideally positioned here, could really play a role in bringing new innovation to market by saying, okay, we will make a conditional contract under these circumstances that then allows the startup to go back and say, no, look, we have a piece of paper. Like, it allows investors to connect the dots because from their perspective, this is a totally opaque process, right? It's like, oh, is this a commitment? Is it not a commitment? A handshake deal? Like, I'm not going to write you a check for that. If I can't see it each step of the way, I don't trust it, right? And so making that more trusted. I mean, look, when I'm having conversations with other ingredient innovators, I'm telling them to expect a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, especially if you're a new company. There's 6 months of just getting people to trust you. I had someone tell me, somebody tell me that no one in the industry trusts you until they see you at a conference twice.
Really? All right.
I don't, but it's not, they were not wrong. I mean, I don't think that's quite true, but they were not wrong. I definitely got different reactions. I mean, I'm a particularly unique fish in this ocean, but yeah. And then, but this is where I think having something that is, if you really understand performance from the perspective of the consumer and what the cosmetic chemist or the brand needs to prove that, there are ways to move faster and people will be more willing to take a bet on you. And then I think on some level, you have to be willing to trade off some level of exclusivity for that, whether that is, purchasing or volume commitment. Like, you have to be willing to give to get, and that's the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting, thought exercise, I would call it, because when you're thinking about like, okay, we're here, we can start to produce this material, and then you're like, but we don't know how much to produce because people are hesitant to put in POs. And then you get to the point too, where you're like, if this goes viral, we're kind of screwed because we have to make, we want it to sell. But if, a large CPG came to us and said, great, we'll want 1,000 metric tons. You're like, we don't have that, so that balance was a very tricky game to play in terms of like, well, are we investing too much money in just having stock because no one's ready to put in a PO, but they might be in 6 months, or, are we kicking ourselves in the ass because what if somebody drops a big one, in 2 months? So it's an interesting area.
This is where I think the right contract manufacturer, there is an opportunity here.
Sure.
Now, you have to understand the science, right? And you have to be able to understand what ingredients would be unique. But there are startups that want to play in this space, but can't figure out how to do it. And you could then create rules for yourself around contracting and scale up that you can then offer to those startups at quite favorable terms, and then have ingredients that brands can literally get from nowhere else. So they're not going to switch from you if you're a CM at that point, because you have, effectively volume locked up for the first several years. I think to me, the virality problem is less of a concern, just because the use rate of most beauty ingredients is low enough that that most people should be able to scale up manufacturing in most cases. I mean, obviously, it depends on their process and case by case basis, but there should be some ability to kind of. It's unlikely to be that the ingredient manufacturer is stocked out. Like, you're going to be stocked out, like not just of the ingredient, of like everything, right? If something truly goes viral. But yeah, I do think that the right innovator could do a lot of really interesting things there.
A little bit tangential, but you and I have had conversations about material science and how that actually is foundational to beauty. And, your background in material science brings a perspective that, kind of goes beyond skincare. How do you think that cross-industry lens helped or complicated the journey of launching an ingredient?
Yeah, well, I'll give you one of each. So I think one thing that I like to say a lot is that beauty science is material science. Like, fundamentally, a nail polish is a paint. And one of the things that makes me really excited about beauty as an industry is an entry point for new materials into our economy, new materials that are more efficient, better for the environment, lower cost, higher performance, right? Yeah. And it allows a manufacturer to just start at smaller scales. If you want to start in like industrial chemicals, people are going to want to buy in like metric tons or 55-pound bags. And then one of the great things about beauty is that there's a whole segment of the market that wants, 1 kg pack sizes if they can get it, right? And so that's really a really, really great, that's a benefit. That's a reason to kind of go through all of the different problems. So I think that kind of cross-industry view helps from that perspective of saying, okay, well, if something has unique performance benefits here, it will probably also have them in other places. That depends a little bit if you're talking about a functional versus an active, but you're unlikely to just only get one. And then you can use that to raise money off of, because you're telling people, look, I'm going to crack this industry first, and then I'm going to move on from a place of strength into other areas. I think it can hurt you if you try to take on everything at the same time. And so just like I, tell ingredient innovators, like, look, pick a use case, right? Don't try to do sunscreens and serums and lotion. Like, don't tell everybody that you also don't want to try to do both, like, food and beauty at the same time, right? You want to make traction in one and then move to the other, and then the other and the other, even if there are going to be technical similarities across them.
And do you think, and I guess, why would you give that advice? Just, I'm curious, because I know a lot of innovation can be cross-industry, right? Like, you started to see kind of this adoption of the non-meat alternatives. And so that kind of signaled almost an opening for potentially, the use of GMO ingredients, right? And so, that, I don't know how well that's translated, having been at a biotech startup. We still had a lot of hesitation about that, but, we always kind of use that as a use case, as an example. But, how do you see those being conflicting, other than a bandwidth issue, right? Of like your focus being kind of like, separate. Do you see it from any sort of reputation, or, how are you viewing, or why would you give that advice?
Yeah. It's a great question. And look, I think there's no way to totally be a purist. While I was at Macro Oceans, we both launched new beauty ingredients while developing new food ingredients. And we knew that there was going to be a ramp between one and the other, and that we were going to have to ramp those things in order to be where we wanted to be as a business. I would say, at the very, very early days, you're trying to master what a particular buyer wants for a particular use case and how to serve them really, really well. And it is much, much better to be a 10 out of 10 than a 9 out of 10. It's not linear, the difference between a 9 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10. And so you got to get something to 10 out of 10 first. That's one. And then the other thing is, I think it can be it's not just bandwidth, but how you interpret feedback. You are doing product development and you have a mix of meetings in a week, and about half are people from the food industry and half are people from the beauty industry. I don't care who you are and what AI tools you're using. You're going to get blurred and you're not going to see the themes in the same way. And one of the ways that the focus helps you is it helps you like really dial in and be like, wow, this is the thing that people are struggling with. And so I'll just like, we never would have seen the potential of Big Kelp Flex as a suspension agent if we hadn't been living in beauty. We would have been like, how big is that market anyway? But we had in our customer set multiple different people that were like, I just really don't like my options here. And so then when we saw the science, we recognized it, right? And so only focus, I think, allows for that. And over time, you can take on more complexity. So, you want to move from simple to complex.
Yeah. All right. We don't often get to hear from, I think, founders about things that they wish they do differently. And I don't know if, oftentimes we joke about like founder syndrome, right? Like, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. I would have done nothing, like all my mistakes got me here. But looking back, what would you approach differently, either from a scientific, a commercial, or just from a personal basis?
Yes, that's a great question. I am definitely not one of those people that's like no regrets. I do not believe in that. I don't think you want to like beat yourself up, but I do think that like looking backwards is helpful in terms of looking forwards. I mean, look, I don't think we were aggressive. I was not aggressive enough in the beginning about saying what is the best possible ingredient in this that I'm going to be competing against, and how do I measure up against them? And I think I would have saved us a lot of time and a lot of energy by like forcing that conversation sooner. I think when you're starting a company and you, to some extent, want to paint your product and your business in a positive light, but ultimately the way to do that is from selecting like really, really good projects to work on. And that then means killing projects where you can't win. And so certainly I think we did some of it, but it when we did it the second time, we were much more aggressive in terms of being like, okay, what's the best possible natural and synthetic in this case, and how do we stack up against those? And if we don't feel good about that, we're going to move on to the next use case, right? And I think that is something that you have to feel. I think you have to learn that by doing it.
I love that. I believe like we kind of call that like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Where you've put so much time and energy into it that if it doesn't work out, then everything meant nothing, right? So you continue to push and push and push and then say, well, and then the narrative changes in your own head, right? Where you're like, well, it does equally better, right? So, when you're thinking about that and taking that lesson, what are those guardrails that you would recommend putting around those projects? Is it, creating principles? Is it creating KPIs that are very clear and you say, we stick to these or we cancel?
I think it would be disingenuous for me to give the advice that's like either something is awesome or you fold up shop. I don't think that mentality, I think that mentality also misses. What I think where I am now is that you want to have two hats, and one hat is a project selection hat, and it's can we be the best at this? And you want to have a really high standard in that when you have that hat on, and then you need to put something out into the world and go out and sell it. And so at a certain point in time, it does behoove you to pick the best thing that you've got and go and sell it. And now you put on your sales hat, and then you're painting your product in the best possible light. Yeah. And I think as you evolve as a business, you can move between those two, and right, you can have a higher bar for new products, as you go. But I think that's that's how I think about it right now. Is you want to be moving back and forth between those things.
Yeah. Having been a part of, and this is a joke I always make, the last startup I was at was probably like my fifth. And I was like, you get really good when you're failing so much, you get very good at like being able to see the disaster before it happens. After a while, you're just kind of like, we don't have the technical capabilities. What are the gaps? And so it is something that unfortunately you gain through experience.
It also takes a certain amount of like, look, no one will ever try anything if part of being a startup person or an entrepreneur is a certain degree of irrationality, right? Because you have to solve problems that you've never solved before in most cases, or it would already be done. Yeah. So I think you do need a little bit of both, right?
Although it does sound a little bit like ego too, right? Where you're like, I can solve this.
You got to have some. You got to have, you want to have it under control. You want the ego to be under control, but you do have to have, at the end of the day, you do have to believe that you can bring something unique that no one else is bringing. And I think and what I really like about the ingredient side is that actually what you're saying is I can help people bring totally unique products to the fore. I mean, one of my favorite things about being on that side was all of the brands that I got to work with, right? Like these are really inspiring people that really care about doing something. They've got that energy too, right? So yeah, but you gotta have a little bit of ego and irrationality. And,
Awesome. Yeah. Well, to close out our section, what is something, some advice that you would give formulators and brand founders that you wish they were better to understand about adopting new ingredients?
Well, I'm reading this book right now called Becoming Trader Joe. It's the guy who started Trader Joe's. And I'm learning a lot from it. But one of the things that he catches on to pretty early on is what he calls discontinuities. And basically what he's saying there is that there are product opportunities that are only available to somebody who understands the category and the regulations. And who understands the industry enough to make purchasing decisions. And so he's talking about this from a grocery perspective. Sure. So there are types of cheese that he can bring to the market because he understands the regulations and the buying patterns and packaging sizes and all of that. And I think that today I see a lot of brand founders, cosmetic chemists, contract manufacturers treating the ingredient side of the industry like it's a black box. Like they get a sales sheet, they can either work with it or not, right? But for somebody who's willing to go a level or two deeper, there are real opportunities to create relationships and create innovation opportunities that will make your product unique compared to the other products on the market. And I hope that the industry, and if people want to talk about this is something I will absolutely just have a Zoom call with you and just because I wish Suppliers Day had a section that was all about matching like novel ingredient innovation and brands or CMs that are willing to make a purchasing commitment. I think that's relatively low cost, right? But like it's a meeting point where people can come together. Yeah. And the reason that I'm passionate about this is the point about beauty science being material science, right? Ideally, beauty is on the forefront of adopting some of these novel materials and commercializing them, so that we can use them for like many, many more things. Sure. And I see that potential there. So anyway, that's what I would love to see. I think historically the industry has taken like many of these things have been byproducts of other industrial processes, which is nothing wrong. I'm not criticizing that, but I think it leads people into a situation where they're like, well, everybody is working with the exact same tools and I can't be different on that. So I'm going to distinguish myself in other ways. And I just don't think that's true. I think we should be shaking that up a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I recently spoke to a woman who's on the creative side, doing a lot of print, kind of like the verbal way that a brand expresses themselves. And I had asked her about, well, do brands come to you when they're just starting out, right? She's like, no, usually they have a product and I've got, and I've got to figure out how they're different. And I was like, well, that seems very difficult. And she kind of challenged what I thought of as quote unquote like white space or innovation, right? Where you can have products that seemingly look very similar, but they can be very different in, whether there's a story behind one ingredient or the way that it's used by a different persona or archetype of consumer, right? And so I think that a lot of what I have come to the industry with is like, well, what's not there versus like what can I do with what is there in a way that is different. So it is kind of a mindset shift.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's totally right. I also think that there's an opportunity on the funding side. I see a lot of funding going into brands, and I don't see as many like. So if you're a new brand and you're launching, there are really good investors that really understand how to win in the brand space and what good looks like. There are far less of those on the ingredient side. And I think that's an opportunity too. That's a place where you could there's a mix of something that could be really interesting in there.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And again, James had a call to arms. If you ever want to talk about, we'll just put your email address and then you'll get an inbound of all these people wanting to debate or
I would love that. Yeah.
It's your next business model is just, you can pay for conversations about this. So
no, this conversation is totally free. I will make virtual coffee with any. I have time on my end, so let's do it.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.